Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I am joined by Dr. Donna Hicks. Dr. Hicks is an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University and the former deputy director of the Program on International Conflict Analysis and Resolution, PCAR. She facilitated dialogues in numerous unofficial diplomatic efforts in the Middle East, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Colombia, Cuba, Libya, really anywhere that there was conflict around the world. She was a consultant at the BBC in Northern Ireland, where she co-facilitated a television series, Facing the Truth, with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. She has taught courses in conflict resolution at Harvard and Columbia universities and conducts seminars in the US and abroad on dignity leadership training and on the role dignity plays in resolving conflict. She also consults with corporations, governments, schools, churches, all kinds of organizations, and has written several books on dignity, including Dignity, its essential role in resolving conflict, and Leading with Dignity, how to create a culture that brings out the best in people. I'm not going to get too into what we talked about. He has a great story in the beginning that lays out why dignity is so important and how she came to that concept and that principle. And then we really unpack our own dignity and how we give dignity to others. So that's all I will say. But I do think this is really a foundational concept. I think if we can really practice this for ourselves and for other people, it has the ability to transform the way we feel about ourselves, the way we feel about our interactions with other people, and really the tone of all of the relationships that we have. I know I wasn't going to say a lot, and then I did. That's it. Without further ado, here is Dr. Donna Hicks. Donna, welcome to the show. Very excited to jump in here. My podcast editor, shout out to Catherine O'Brien, had reached out to me editing another show that you were on and had said, hey, I think you would really enjoy not only talking to Donna, but the nature of her content, talking about dignity. And so you were gracious enough to take a phone call with me and agree to come on here. And so excited to jump in. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I really enjoy these conversations.
Let's start at the beginning then. And I know there's the origin story sets a lot of the groundwork for what we're going to talk about. So what is the origin story for how you came to the concept of dignity as such a pillar when it comes to negotiation and resolving human conflict?
Yeah, most of my career, I would say the last 20 years, I was doing international conflict mediation, going into all the hot spots all over the world. I started out in the Middle East and ended up in Sri Lanka after that for 10 years and did a big project in Colombia and then Northern Ireland and then Libya. And that wherever there was a hot conflict, my organization at Harvard, it was called the Program on International Conflict Analysis and Resolution. We were often asked to come in and try to bring the parties together for dialogue so that they could work out some of their issues. And what was unique about our program was that we're all psychologists. And so we weren't political scientists, even though I have a degree in political science, but the approach that we take is the psychological dimension of these intractable conflicts. So there's a lot of psychology, and I would be sitting at these tables and as I said, I started out in the Middle East. We would be talking about some sensitive political issues that divided them. And suddenly someone would get very upset, would push back from the table, would turn all red and start getting really angry. And we would just watch that and let the person, let him have his, and I say him because it was always guys, have their moment of emotional outburst. And then whenever this happened, it was always so clear we're talking about something really deep here. These people were all influential political players and they were trained in negotiation. So there was something going on. And the same thing happened when I was in Sri Lanka. Same thing happened when I was in Colombia, this big outburst. And at one point, I decided to screw up my courage and say to the person, I think this was when I was in Sri Lanka. And the big outburst happened, the emotional tsunami. And I said, excuse me, this was such a powerful reaction that you just had. And it was so deeply emotional. I said, do you mind if we talk about that? And this person looked at me and said, emotional? It's not about emotions. This is about injustice. This is about identity. I said, okay, sorry. Wrong word. Wrong word. But yet it was clearly emotional.
Yeah.
And because, you see, they don't like admitting to being emotional because it makes them look weak. So I learned that after.
Wait, men don't like admitting to being called emotional?
And no, do you get that? Yeah.
Shocker.
So, all right. So then I decided, I bet this is a trauma response. I realized this is a deep trauma response. And maybe the next time this happens, if I ask them to talk about, how traumatizing being involved in these wars, how traumatic it is. And so I went to, I think next time I was in Colombia, I decided, okay, the outburst happened. It was so predictable. They always happen. And I said, excuse me, do you think we could just pause here for a minute? Because I have a feeling that this big reaction that you had, it was really in response to being so traumatized by this war. And he said to me, trauma? No, it's not about trauma. It's about justice. It's about identity. It's about I said, okay, sorry. So 2 strikes out.
Oh, for 2.
Strikes
Yeah.
out. And then, I don't know, I felt like such a failure because I couldn't put the right words to what was going on here, to the extent that they would accept it and be willing to discuss it. So anyway, long story short, but at one point I realized I was thinking about this and I said to myself, what would they want to say to themselves or say to the other side, excuse me. And I thought they'd want to say, how dare you treat us this way? Can't you see we're human beings? Don't you see we're suffering and you're doing nothing about it? That's what they want to say. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is about their dignity. This is about not even being treated as a human being. And that word just came into me like a lightning bolt. And I thought, okay, the next session that I have with these people, with another party in conflict, I'm going to use the dignity word and see what happens. Okay, fast forward, I'm at another table with another group. Same thing happens, the big reaction, the big emotional outburst. I stopped them and I said, oh my gosh, I said, this is really a powerful reaction. I said, I have a feeling that this might have something to do with the way that you feel your dignity has been assaulted by the other side. Is there any truth to that? I said. And there was like 12 of them in the room. They all looked at me like, dignity? Yeah, this is about dignity. And both sides said that. This is about dignity. We have suffered so many dignity assaults that we're not even treated like we're human. And I said, all right, how about if we have a discussion about the ways in which you feel your dignity has been injured? And it was that door that opened, and it opened so wide that so I said, would you be willing, all of you, to have that discussion first before we continue with talking about the political issues that divide you? And they all said yes. And it was so powerful. I just can't even explain to you. First time these people have been talking about dignity and the way it's affected them and how it's preventing them from even signing on to an agreement. So I learned in that moment that, oh my gosh, this is a missing link in my understanding of conflict. I never thought about dignity, the word dignity. I thought about trauma and all the emotions and this and that as a psychologist, but I never thought about the word dignity. From that moment on, I decided, oh my gosh, I have to write about this. I have to put this out there so my colleagues in the international community, so that they can tap into this because it's so powerful. And It took me a long time. It took me about 7 years to write my first book. It's called Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict. But O'Brien, what happened was a shock to me. Once the book got published and it got out there, I thought, oh yes, as I said, my international conflict people are going to be pleased. What happened? I got calls from the corporate world. I got calls from healthcare. I got calls from education, higher ed, and
Yeah.
K through 12 education. But the business community in particular, I would get messages from some of the leadership team of some of these companies. They say, I think you nailed our problem with our toxic work culture. I think they feel like we're not treating them with dignity. And they would say to me, help, we need your help here because this one leader said to me, I never even imagined talking about dignity in the workplace. And I said, we can try. We can
Yeah.
see if it works in your environment. And not only did it work, but it gave the leadership team a whole new perspective on relationships in the workplace. A lot of them had these top-down leadership notions that command and control. We've got to be the ones making all the decisions. And that leadership style doesn't fit well with leading with dignity. So we just embarked. I can't even tell you countless numbers of interventions that I've done with the corporate world. And to segue into my definition of dignity, because it's really important. When I wrote that first book, I read all this philosophy and psychology, and I read the theologians' notion of what dignity was, and they got all analytical. And I thought, no, we have to make this as simple as possible so that people, when we talk to them about it, they're going to say, yeah, that's it. That's what's happening to me. And so my simple definition is that our dignity is our inherent value and worth. We come into the world, we humans, every single one of us, it's the highest common denominator in the human species. We all want to be treated as if we matter. We all want to be treated as if we have worth and value. And when we're not, we suffer. We really suffer. And I identified it, O'Brien, as a unexplored source of human suffering. And the dignity language, I call the dignity model, I created it to work with people. It's a way of bringing dignity into an organization or a workplace. But once they get that it's every single person is born with dignity, they always say to me, now here's the follow-up. They always say to me, oh, isn't that same as respect? And I say, no, it's not the same as respect, because for dignity, we don't have to do anything to say that we have dignity because it's inherent. We were born with it as little kids. And usually when I do a PowerPoint here, I have this photograph of two precious little newborn kids, babies. And I say, look at them. Would you say for an instant that they don't have inherent value and worth? I say, look, they're invaluable. They're priceless. They're irreplaceable. And we have to treat them that way. The problem is once these kids grow up, we forget how precious they are.
Yeah.
Keeping that mindset that it's different from respect, because in my view, and I learned this from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, in my view, that respect has to be earned. And dignity, on the other hand, is just basic. It's the platform from which we enter the world. But the problem is most people haven't accepted their dignity. That's the lion's share of the work to start, is getting people to recognize, hey, I don't have to do all this stuff, all these accomplishments in order to say I feel good about myself and I'm great. In fact, my story is that I got 5 degrees thinking I was going to feel a sense of worth by getting all these degrees. I even did a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard with the most prestigious psychologists there. And I was offered a job at Harvard. And you know what? None of that gave me dignity. None of it did. It wasn't until I worked with Archbishop Tutu that I realized, hey, girl, he said, you've got dignity, so stop working so hard. Just embrace it. Accept it. He said, you've got to liberate your dignity. And I use those words with everybody I work with now. Come on, O'Brien, just liberate your dignity. Let it shine.
Jim Carrey, the actor, comedian.
Sure.
Yeah. So he has a great quote where he says, I wish everybody could get every material desire they have so they could all understand that's not what it's about.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to use
All
that.
right. So we have more material to unpack from that intro than we have
Yeah.
time for. Let's start on the self dignity piece, because I think once we accept our dignity, it's easier to give it to others. Or maybe not. Maybe the hardest part is giving it to ourselves. I don't want to spend all the time on the self because I don't want to turn this into a therapy session necessarily. But I do think this is an important point. I do think this is something we all struggle with. Oh, I'll be good enough when, or
Yeah.
I'll be worthy when. I feel that in my life too. I believe that most people's greatest achievements stem from their biggest insecurities.
Mm.
I think we are all overcompensating for things. And I had this conversation with a friend the other day. There are 5 big fears that we all have, according to certain researchers. And one of them is insignificance. And that's the one that bubbles up for me over and over again. I believe life is short and we get one shot. And I want it to have meant something. And so I do all these random things. And a lot of people will come to me and they'll be like, man, you have a podcast and you work and I wrote a children's book and you do all this stuff. And they're like, that's so cool. And I'm like, I think it's cool. I'm doing it because I like it and I enjoy it and it's coming from a place of joy. But at the same time, it's coming from a place of insecurity and fear too. It's not all motivated by fear, but it is a little bit. And so I just wonder, like, how do you reconcile that a lot of us feel that way with this concept of unleashing your dignity?
It's so common. I see it every time I go into an organization and try to introduce this idea. And the fact that it's like our lowest common denominator that we have these insecurities, that they show up, and that there's an epidemic of self-doubt out there. I have discovered that self-doubt is far more prevalent than self-love and self-understanding our self-worth.
I believe that.
And so and I make that very clear because I don't want people to feel shamed because they haven't accepted their dignity. I was one of them. I was like into my adulthood before I accepted it. The fact is that once you take the shame out of it, and especially working with a group of people, you take the shame out of it and people can talk about it. People can free themselves up with the inner dialogue that says, oh, you have to do one more really significant thing before you can feel okay. Stop worrying about your life and your purpose and whatever. And I mentioned Desmond Tutu because, this man, I don't know how I got so lucky to work with him. I worked with him for about 10 years before he died. He said to me once when I was talking about this issue of self-doubt, and everybody I work with are certain sometimes they feel like they've had their dignity stripped from them. And Tutu said to me, Donna, that is so wrong. Don't perpetuate that myth. He said, we can never have our dignity stripped from us, ever. He said, because it is in there, just like you're born with this whole physical body and eyes and ears and now all this. Nobody can take your dignity away from you.
Yeah.
And he said to me, and this was the clincher, he said to me, how do you think we Black South Africans got through apartheid? All those years of dehumanization, they treated their dogs and their animals better than they treated us, the white Afrikaners, he said. How do you think we got through that? And he said, the only way we made it through was knowing that our dignity was in our hands and our hands only, and nobody was going to take it away from us. And Mandela, that's what was his mantra. Also, this is what Tutu taught me, that Mandela said when he went into prison in Robben Island for 27 years, he said the first thing he did was try to figure out what the guards were up to. And that in the first 20 minutes of his getting into the prison, he discovered that they tried to strip them of their dignity. And Mandela said, oh, phew, now I know what they're doing. They're trying to strip me of my dignity. I'm never going to give my dignity up for any man or any institution, he said. So I know I'm going to survive. That I know. And so that really had a profound effect on me. And I tell that story every time, that our dignity it's sacrosanct, it's in there, it's waiting for us. He said, our dignity is very patient. It doesn't just say, okay, I'm done with you. I'm going to move on to the next person. No. So I spend
Yeah.
a lot of time talking about it, a lot, because without that basic knowledge that I am worthy no matter what I do, all the other accomplishments I have, that's like frosting on the cake. That's wonderful. But the starting point is that self acceptance that I was born with. This is part of my human identity. Because the next step is to help people see that everybody else has it. If they're human beings, they have it too. It's very delicate work, O'Brien, on one hand, and
Yeah.
tender. It brings out the tenderness in people. And when we do this in a group setting, it's so powerful. People get so connected and the empathy factor goes up so high. They feel that connection with that similar human suffering that they've been through. So it's the source of human connection in the very best way possible. And so if you can do it for yourself, see it in others. And I have one other step too: accept your own, accept that other people have it too. But the third aspect of what I call dignity consciousness is accepting that you need a connection to something greater than yourself as well. And for people who are in faith communities, that can be their creator, their God. Students are really quite clever at coming up with this third connection. And they say to me all the time, I want to be connected to the greater good. I want my job to be not just to give me an income and have a nice house and cars and this and that. I want to be contributing to the greater good. For young people, I mean, that gave me so much hope to hear that their aspiration was to make this world a better place somehow and do the work, the significant work, to use your worry of insignificance,
Yeah.
make sure that they are known to be making that contribution.
Can I
Something
ask you a question about that though? I
else.
heard something the other day that I really liked and it helped me with my head because I felt that way too, as I just told you, my insecurities and significance. I hear people say this, and I've even said this in the past too. I want to have an impact. I want to have some significance. And I think we think of that as we need to be Elon Musk sending a rocket to Mars, or we need to be the ones cleaning up the environment. Like it has to be at this like
Huge.
global
Yeah.
species wide scale though. If you're not changing the world for the better for all of humanity, that somehow that's not significant. And I can't remember who I heard this. It's probably on another podcast interview somewhere, but somebody said, what is really significant is helping your neighbor.
Mm,
It's like, it's helping a younger person in your workplace who is struggling with a problem that you've solved, mentoring one other person. Like that is significance. And I think it ties back to your concept of dignity, which is if you really want to be significant in your sphere, like in your 20
exactly.
square feet. Go be significant there. Because if you're not significant there, it's much harder to be significant at the grand scale.
Yeah.
And not all of us are going to hit the grand scale. And I think even if you look at a guy like Elon gets picked on all the time, but if you look at a guy like that, he's got 5 or 6 species impacting, humanity impacting projects going on, whether you like him or not. He's trying to solve major problems, but he doesn't seem like a very happy guy. And so I don't know that what we should be aiming at for fulfillment is that grand significance. It's
Mhm.
more the like, how do we recenter into our communities and affect the people that we meet along our path of life? It seems like we need to refocus what that word means of doing something significant.
I love what you're saying. That just is exactly how I see it as well. And I'd use the word creating human connections, powerful dignity, mutually dignity, honoring connections, because it's through those human connections, whether it's you're helping your neighbor's son who is struggling a little bit with math or whatever, or you're helping somebody in your community who needs a ride. It sounds like they're little things, but they're not. They're
They're
huge
not. They're
because
huge. They
you're
could be
creating,
life-changing things.
they could be life changing, and even your own family, honestly,
Yeah,
because
start there, right?
I have had so many people come up to me and say, I actually wrote about it in my first book. The first time that this one guy, I was doing a mediation between the military and the Ministry of Defense in a Latin American country. And I introduced this dignity approach, and they were like, oh, they're rolling their eyes a little bit. And then after 2 days of working with them and they repaired their relationship, everything really worked. After the 2-day workshop I did, the one general came up to me and said, Don, I've got to hand it to you. I was a little uncertain about how you're going to help us resolve this relationship, but you did. And he said, I am so grateful. And he said, maybe even more importantly, I think you saved my marriage.
Wow.
Because when I was going through all the ways in which dignity can be honored and how you treat people, and he said, I think I've been violating my wife's dignity all this time and she still stays with me. I don't know why. And so anyway, he said, I'm going to be a better husband now, thanks to you, thanks to this dignity awareness.
Kudos to that guy for being able to translate the
And even
lesson.
saying it to me and telling me. But you're right. It's in the everyday dignity honorings that are really what create a sense of I'm living a purposeful life here. I am really honoring. I'm seeing people, I'm listening to them, I'm hearing their stories, I'm helping them out, whatever it is. But it's extending that human connection because, especially for powerful people who are really successful and everything, for them to reach out to somebody who is a younger person who needs help, like you were just saying originally about helping others, a neighbor, it's so gratifying too.
Yeah.
The real gratification is seeing the effects of your extending dignity to the person. I don't care who it is. I sometimes go to the grocery store and start a conversation with a checkout person, and we'll talk and chat, and I'll say, how's your day been? And this and that. And one time, this one woman said, nobody ever asks me about how my day's been. They ask me, can you give me a lower price on this banana? But you can affect people in big and small ways.
And it affects you too. Like I notice when I am nice to random people, I feel better.
Yep.
Like it makes me feel good to go compliment the barista behind the counter. There's a weird thing of, oh, I'm going to go make this person feel better, but it actually makes you feel better. That's how we're designed, is to have those interactions.
I have a line in my book that says, when we honor somebody's dignity, we strengthen our own.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. And the other line that really works well for people is that if indignity tears us apart, dignity can put us back together again. So when relationships break down because of indignities passed back and forth, if they learn about how to honor dignity, even in the most difficult of circumstances, we can recreate that human connection that we're all yearning for.
All right, so let's talk about how we do that, because I think this is great, but I do want to make sure that we have time to talk about what this kind of repair actually looks like. And I like talking about extreme examples because I think you can distill those down. And I think as we go through some of these, it's just important for people to realize that this is not something that happens just in the extreme. This is in how we all react. So let's say you get two sides in a mediation or negotiation that come together and both feel like their dignity has been slighted, and maybe they've both done terrible things to each other, right? Yeah. It's two countries who have been at war and they have done terrible things to each other, or two spouses who have been fighting and undercutting each other. You say, they did this to me, and it's like, yeah, they did. And the other person feels justified in doing that in some way. So how do we get the temperature down enough to even be able to mediate this stuff? And then what are the action steps to rebuilding that mutual dignity?
I wrote a whole book on that question. It's called Leading with Dignity. How do you create a culture that brings out the best in people?
Yep. And we'll link to all that in the show notes and everything, all your books and everything.
But this takes a lot of education. We have to first and foremost, if I'm going to bring a party together, whether it's in the workplace or wherever it is, everybody has to understand the basics of dignity. The definition is one important thing. Make a distinction, because people who have been at each other, you can't ask them to respect each other before resolving their issues. That's just a bridge too far. You can't do it. But if there is a mutual understanding that what dignity is, and I've got these 10 elements of dignity that I've come up with in my research, 10 ways to honor dignity, everybody has to be on the same page and have that basic knowledge and understanding. It's not just something that you can pull out of your hat when something bad happens without having people understand what we're trying to do here. We're trying to use dignity to repair a relationship. And
So you're
so,
just upfront about it. You're just like,
oh,
hey, here's how we're going to do this.
oh yeah,
We're going to
you're gonna
reclaim
learn,
our dignity here and let's do some exercises on that.
but it takes a while.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so for example, I've got 5 basic building blocks of the dignity model. The first is the definition that we've already discussed. The difference between dignity and respect is absolutely crucial to understand that. The neuroscience of dignity is really important because what I've learned is that when people experience a wound to their dignity, what the neuroscience tells us, that scientists tell us, is that because they've done research on this, they wire people up and put them in brain scans and watch a video about when people's had their dignity violated, when they've had a physical injury, and different scenarios. And what they've shown is that when people are watching a video of a physical injury, the part of the brain that gets illuminated and starts charging up is the most ancient part of our brain. It's called the amygdala. It's the pain center. It's where fight and flight comes from. It's like going wild when we feel physical harm. Now, the most interesting thing that they have told us is that when people experience a violation to their dignity, the same area of the brain illuminates and goes wild. So what does this mean? It means that our brain doesn't know the difference between somebody who's assaulting our dignity and leaving that impact in us versus somebody who's come and give us a punch in the face or something, and that the same big reaction that we have, same area of the brain. Yet we have an entire legal system that protects us from physical injury, but we don't have any system that protects us from basic dignity violations. And that's why making sure people understand this, have a dignity, what I call Dignity 101 education before we start to do any of this healing work, because everybody has to be sharing the same foundation, the same platform, the same language. And then I've come up with something called the 10 elements of 10 ways to have their dignity honored, and then 10 ways that we can violate our own dignity. And so there's all of this stuff that, because the language is important, O'Brien, it's important that we have a shared language to talk about these injuries.
Yeah. I think your initial comments or your initial story highlights the importance of words and word choice, right? Like you were getting at the same thing, but you got really negative reactions the first 2 times just using a different word, right? Because it makes people bristle. And it's interesting. I have a lot of conversations on here about conflict and conflict resolution, and there's a lot of conflict going on out there in the world right now. And I see people not careful with the words that they're using.
Right.
And just the other side shouldn't bristle at this. They should be able to handle this. But then they turn around and they bristle when the other side uses the words that they're using to make a point that could be a fair point. They're just not using words that can get through that armor. And so their haunches go up. And it is a delicate thing to be able to slip a concept through the emotional defense system.
Yeah. The word dignity, it invites curiosity. Like I say dignity and they say, oh, what do you mean by that? What is that about? It sounds so important, but tell me, because most people are so ignorant of what it really means. That's why I'm saying they have to first understand, go through and learn those basic building blocks and how conflict is just inevitable if we don't have this understanding. I think what we're seeing today, the polarization in the world that we're seeing today, it's like a free-for-all for indignity.
Oh my
People
God.
back and forth, a free-for-all. So
Yeah.
we need this more than ever now. And I think once people get a grasp of this and really begin to feel it for themselves, one important thing happens, because when we're in conflict, empathy for the other is the first thing that goes out the window. We feel justified in saying terrible things or berating others. And let me just jump to the answer to your question. Let's say we've all been through all of these dignity classes. We know what it is. We know how it works, and we know the 10 elements, the 10 temptations, all that. But once we get to the point where we're going to both sit down and have a conversation about the way we've been violating each other's dignity, and there's ground rules for that. Like, you have to speak to be understood and listen to understand. That's like the major ground rule. And one of the most important aspects of preparing yourself to have one of these conversations is to make sure that your goal is to understand something that you don't know about the other person. Don't assume judgment immediately. Don't assume, seek deeper understanding of what has been going on with the other person. And this is true for political polarization, but it's also true for dynamics in marriages and with families and coworkers and stuff.
Yeah.
Being patient and listening, but this needs facilitation until you get really skilled at it. You need a third person to help you guide you through this. But I want to say about the healing and back to this notion of empathy, because when part of the process is trying to get the empathy back again, because that's where the humanity gets reconnected.
How do we do that? We see somebody do something that we think is terrible or despicable or something like that. How do we hold in our heads that person's dignity and humanity and account for their bad behavior?
The way I understand this and the way I work with this, and it seems helpful to other people, is to make a distinction between the person that is behaving badly and the bad behavior. So in other words, the person should be treated with dignity no matter what, but the behavior is open to scrutiny. So if the person starts committing a dignity violating behavior, let's say starts screaming at you or discriminating against you or treating you unfairly, then the topic of conversation not is, how could you do this? You're such a bad person. What are you doing here? You have humiliated these people. No, you talk about how harmful the behavior is. Using that neuroscience, you say that maybe you weren't even aware of it, but the way you spoke to the person in our staff meeting the other day, that was so humiliating. And I'm sure maybe you weren't even aware of it. Maybe you weren't. But you have to understand that did harm to me, being the person who was the recipient of that bad behavior. And there's all sorts of careful ways to use language. I have a whole process called giving and receiving feedback, because the whole point of feedback is you want to help the person see what they can't see. We all have blind spots. Every single one of us has blind spots. And others can see our blind spots, but we can't. So we need their eyes on us to say, we need their feedback, because they can see ways in which we're violating others' dignity. And so that is one of the most important skills that we try to work with an organization right away. How do you give and receive feedback in a way that promotes learning in the person, not trying to use it as a weapon to get even with them or make them feel bad, to shame them, because that never works.
How do we get over that? When our dignity thread is pulled or violated, we tend to want revenge. We want evenness, eye for an eye, right? There's just, history is filled with examples of these feuds where I want retribution, I want justice, all these words that we have. How do we get over that?
That's part of the ignorance of what it means to be human. The whole process of this dignity education is understanding what it means to be human. And one of the basic human reactions that we have, E.O. Wilson, who was a famous evolutionary biologist, he taught me that we come into the world, the fight and flight instinct. You've heard that, right?
Yeah,
And you probably were engaged in it like me many times as a human being.
sure.
And there are many other of these pre-programmed mental reactions that we have when we're feeling under threat. This is what the 10 temptations to violate our own dignity is all about. And what that means is that when somebody comes at us, whether it comes at us physically or comes at our dignity, both are equally as powerful triggers. We have this instant reaction. It's not even a conscious reaction. It's an instinct. It's like a self-preservation reaction. It
Yeah.
goes all the way. It's really ancient. I have 10 of them in my model, 10 ways that we do this. And taking the bait and wanting to return the harm and seek revenge is fundamental to that human, those self-preservation instincts that are just waiting in our brains to be activated with a threat. And so, but you asked the most important question is, how do we get a handle on that? First of all, we have to know this about ourselves. This is part of self-knowledge. And I'm not talking about the self, meaning Donna or O'Brien. I'm talking about this at this level, the self as a member of the human species. All right. Because all of us.
This is how humans work.
This is humans' work. But I have a colleague at Harvard here who has developed this idea of, he's a leadership guru, Ron Heifetz, his name is. And he has this notion that when we get triggered like that, when those instincts get triggered, it's so important for us to push the pause button and to try to find the balcony, the metaphorical balcony, where we're taking our consciousness up to a point on the balcony where we're able to see the whole context here and to understand what our reactions are and try to make a choice. Because these instincts, these self-preservation instincts, you don't feel like you've got a choice. You just want to pounce.
Yeah.
And so there are ways, pushing the pause button. One neuroscientist told me that she thought the best way to stop those reactions are to take 10 deep breaths, not count to 10, but there's something about connecting your vagus nerve up with your brain that calms you down and makes it possible for you to make a choice. I go through all of this stuff in my writing.
And what's interesting about that is, like, you can read Stoic philosophy and it's in there 2,000 years ago. This is all about between stimulus and response, there is a space.
Yes.
And if we can widen that space for ourselves, we have the ability to choose our actions. Even Jocko Willink, who's a famous Navy SEAL commander who's written on leadership and has a podcast on leadership, he talks about detaching. And he tells a story. He'll actually physically sit back from the table if things are getting a little contentious. He's not sure what to do. And it just gives him a little extra perspective to see the bigger picture. So whether it's 10 deep breaths or it's physically taking a step back or it's meditating on Stoic philosophy, like however you come at it, I think recognizing that we can give some space between what happens to us and how we react to it. And the more space and the more conscious we are in that moment, the better our reactions can become.
That's really beautiful. And I think the other thing that we need in order to understand those reactions and prevent them from taking over our consciousness, we also need a big dose of self-compassion, because we humans, we've inherited a lot of this, what E.O. Wilson calls mental architecture, these structures in our brain that help us survive. But boy, they don't help us with relationships. This was meant for when animals were on our tails, not human beings, but
yeah.
So these reactions are so primitive, they're outdated. Yes, maybe we'll need them in certain catastrophic situations, but when it comes to our interactions with each other, these are outdated reactions, these fight and flights and taking the bait and all of that. But we have to know it first, and we have to be able to name it. We have to be able to say, oops, I'm triggered here. I can feel myself. My heart rate is increasing. I'm short of breath. I can feel I want to pounce, and knowing I don't want to react to that either. So It's an education. This is why I'm saying You can't just jump to the healing without having all these building blocks and awareness of what are we humans up against? What are we up against? And E.O.
Yeah.
Wilson says, we've got all of these wonderful capacities to be in relationship because we're hardwired for love. We humans are hardwired for love and connection. And at the same time, we're also hardwired when we feel a threat coming on. We're hardwired to, like we just said, get even, to get revenge, to return the harm, and all of that.
Yeah.
So E.O. Wilson says, now, what do you think we're going to be as a human species? He says in his talks, he said, what choice are we going to make? Because we both are hardwired for love and connection as humans. That's part of our humanity. But we're also hardwired to kill each other if the threat is big enough. Which, he says, what are we going to choose here? And honestly, he, as a deep evolutionary psychologist, he really was at an optimistic view of this. He said he thinks we humans are going to choose love.
I hope so. I think more of us choose love than don't. And then we need to help the others. I think the concept of creating space between stimulus and our response also, like, it occurs to me that's also the same mechanism that helps us look at somebody who has done something we deem as bad,
Yeah.
and get to choose how we react to that person.
And if we're honest, we would even say, there, but for the grace of God, go I.
Yeah.
Because we're all guilty of those hardwired instincts and jumping on the fight and flight and the taking the bait and shirking responsibility. And we're
Yeah.
all capable of it. And that's why I say we need a big dose of human compassion for ourselves and for ourselves as humans, because we're up against a lot. We've got a lot going on here, especially now. And if we can take time to learn this stuff, to figure out how to extend myself to somebody that I've got a whole section on disagreeing with dignity. What does that look like? And there's some of my colleagues have created this amazing thing called the Dignity Index, and you might want to have them on your podcast because they're terrific people. And we work
Sure.
together very closely all the time.
Oh, yeah, but love to talk to them.
Yeah, they're great. But the point of their work is that they were interested in polarization, political polarization. They wanted to originally judge the extent to which political discourse was dignity honoring or contemptuous of the other side. And so they assessed the speeches of a lot of politicians, and they had this scale, and they rated the politicians on either you can get a high score of 8 or a low score of 1. 1 meaning you're contemptuous, you're constantly talking negatively about the other. And the highest score, of course, is you're honoring their dignity even when you disagree. But here's what ended up happening. They had students from the University of Utah code all of these and assign numbers to the index from the index. And that was interesting enough in itself. But what they ended up feeling was that, oh my gosh, I want to ask myself after doing all these ratings, what am I doing? Am I contributing to the dignity atmosphere, or am I showing contempt?
Yeah.
So she realized that this tool, this dignity index, was a tremendous way of getting people to become aware of the ways in which we are contributing to the polarization and to the negativity. It's fabulous. And they're in the workplace. They're all over now doing.
Yeah. We'll link that in the show notes, and then I would love to get connected with them after we record. And yeah, always looking for good guests. And I really love this topic as we've dove into it here. Is there anything you didn't get to share that you would want to share?
I always say the same thing, O'Brien, and that is that I can't stress enough how important it is for all of us to embrace our own dignity, because we suffer so much when we think that we're not meeting up with our aspirations and that we should be doing this and that. I think once it is so gratifying to truly and to meditate on that is fantastic, to recognize what it feels like to accept your dignity and talk to your friends about it, talk to your family, help them understand how important this is, because so much of the negativity we're experiencing in the world stems from our own self-contempt, not so much how much we feel badly about others. So it's a glorious, liberating experience. And I've done it myself. I can tell you, I've gotten to the other side. I'm experiencing the joy. And the other thing I wanted to end with is that in my field of international conflict resolution, we always say that we want to try to find common ground in order to resolve these conflicts. It's like conflict 101. Everybody learns that. But I've decided that's not my aspiration anymore, to try to find common ground. What I want to do is to help people find higher ground, to lift us up, elevate ourselves, liberate our dignity, because that takes us up to a higher level of consciousness. When we see the effects of our own dignity and see it in others, that takes us to a higher ground and higher consciousness. And I think that's what the human species needs right now, is higher consciousness.
I think that is a beautiful message to wrap on. I think that is great homework for everybody to go do, to meditate on their own dignity and worth and what it would feel like to fully embrace that. Donna, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I think this really is powerful, and it has reshaped in many ways the way that I think about conflict. And I don't say that lightly. I really, when I got turned on to this and we talked that first time, I was like, oh, this is a foundational piece that I need to build into the way that I look at the world. And I hope that it helps others too. And hopefully we can help others through this episode and through your books.
I'm really grateful that you invited me. And as you can see, I'm passionate about this topic.
Yeah. Rightfully so. Good luck to everybody out there. Let's all try to live with a little more self-dignity and share that dignity with others out there just a little bit more, be a little kinder to everybody else. Good luck. And thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.